Hello everyone, ladies and gentlemen, wherever you may be in the world, welcome to another episode of Wednesday Night Live with yours truly, Simon Jacobson. Topic of this class is, why are we deprived? And it's actually a translation of a verse in the Torah, in the book of Numbers, in the chapter Ba'alescha, that refers to this day. Today is a special day in the Jewish calendar. It's called Pesach Sheni, the second Passover. What was the second Passover? So the story that in the Torah goes this way, that after the Jews had left Egypt, the exodus from Egypt, which was a tremendous, momentous event in history, which defined and shaped the Jews as a people and a nation, and they would from there proceed to receive the Torah at Sinai, and from there they would continue their journey to the Promised Land. So after they left Egypt, well, actually, before they left Egypt, they were commanded to bring the Paschal Lamb, the Korban Pesach, which is what defines Passover in the times of the temple, that every Passover a lamb was brought. Today, after the temple is destroyed, we symbolize it with the shank bone that we use at the Seder table. But the Paschal Lamb was a mitzvah to deliver every year a Thanksgiving offering, which is called the Korban Pesach. So the story continues that it came after Passover, and there were people who were unable to bring the Passover offering a year later, after they had left Egypt. The reason was because they were either distant, they were not near an area where they could bring the lamb, or tamea, or they were impure. There were certain conditions to bring this lamb. So a group of people were unable to bring the first Paschal lamb, not the first when they left Egypt. Then all the Jews brought it. I'm talking about the year later, after the temple was erected already, the Mishkan was set up. So the Paschal lamb in the second year after they left Egypt. So there were a group of people who came to Moses and said, Lama Negara, why are we deprived? Why should we be deprived from this great mitzvah of bringing the lamb? So Moses turned to God, and that's what God says to Moses in this chapter, Ba'alescha, as I mentioned, the book of Numbers, that tell them that we'll designate a Pesach Sheni. That if anybody's ever in a situation where on Passover they cannot bring and celebrate Passover properly, they will have a second opportunity a month later, exactly a month from Passover, on the 15th of the month of Iyar. Passover is the 15th of the month of Nisan. A month later is the 15th of the month of Iyar, and there they should be able to bring excuse me. They should be able to bring a second Passover, a second Passover, meaning the ability to bring a Passover lamb. However, this time it's not the same conditions, because on Passover we know that you have to eat it with matzahs and merurim, which is matzahs and maror, the matzah that we eat and the maror, the bitter herbs. This Passover you just bring the lamb, and as a matter of fact, you can even eat chametz. Today's a day that and during the temple as well, was not a day it was forbidden to eat bread. So it's an interesting twist that you bring the lamb in order to commemorate Passover, but you don't commemorate the other aspects of Passover. That's as an aside. But the bottom line is that they've had this opportunity in response to their question, why are we deprived? And every year since then, though we don't bring the offering, we commemorate it today by eating some matzah, and some other ways that people commemorate, not saying tachron, a few other things. Bottom line, the big question, of course, is what is the meaning behind the story, and it's relevant to our lives. So, as usual, when you talk about matters of the Torah, very often, especially if you don't know how to decipher its personal meaning, many episodes and many incidents, many characters, many of the events seem very ancient and archaic and not relevant to our times. When you know how to read not just the body of the Torah, the mechanics, but the soul of the Torah and its spirit, you can derive unbelievable lessons, psychological insights into our soul, into our psyche, into the issues that we struggle with here now in the 21st century as well. And in this context, as we'll soon see, this story opens for us up a whole new approach to how to deal with deprivation, with deficiencies, with shortcomings, with all our failings. We're human beings, and as human beings, we're not perfect human beings. I hope that doesn't surprise everyone. Now the question is, however, since we're all not perfect, yet you find that people deal with imperfection in very different ways. Some people deal with it in very much extreme ways, like retreating. It demoralizes them, lowers their self-esteem, confidence. Others actually change and distort their entire characters and personalities to compensate for something that they feel is a deficiency, either real or perceived. And many, many other convoluted attitudes, approaches that we take when we find ourselves weak, or find ourselves deficient, or deprived. Then, of course, there's the rare few that take a deficiency and rise to the occasion and see it as an opportunity, and they find inner strength to compensate and to deal with it. So the question is, how do you deal with our deficiencies? I recently saw a book that came out, I like the name, was called The Spirituality of Imperfection. Being that we're not perfect human beings, often we hear about, when we talk about spirituality, the things we should aspire to. But going into the belly of the beast, so to speak, and addressing head on, what about the areas in our lives that we feel weak? The areas in our life that we have failed, that we've not been successful. What do you do then? And of course, there are all kinds of different therapies and different approaches of how people deal with this challenge and their challenges in their lives. But the story here with the second Passover can teach us some things that I believe you will not find in much of modern psychology, because it goes deeper into who we are as human beings and what identifies us, what is our inner identity, and how we deal with failure and with loss, etc., etc. Many people, for example, avoid confrontation or avoid difficult situations, or for that matter, avoid commitment out of fear of failure. Fear of failure. It's hard to estimate how many people don't take on certain projects or other type of commitments due to the fear of failure. So better not to involve yourself, because if you fail, you'll feel too terrible. You'll feel too broken, too demoralized. So these things are very difficult to estimate, because you're dealing with the emotions of human beings, and emotions are hard to gauge and measure. And most people don't, first of all, not even aware of their own fears. And secondly, even if they are, they usually don't report it. It's not comfortable, either due to shame or other factors, to just acknowledge that I'm afraid of things that are just the unknown, or fears that are warranted or not warranted. So when you're dealing with issue like what we're discussing here, it goes all the way to the heart of what makes us tick, and what defines self-confidence, and why some people are more confident than others, and why some people, as I said, rise to the occasion, and when they had dealing with a deficiency or a loss, they are able to muster up new energy to reach greater heights. So this is the issue of the and that's the issue that the Jews who were deprived, who felt deprived by not being able to bring the Paschal Lamb. It wasn't just about a technical thing of bringing an offering. There were always other offerings. Shavuos is a holiday, and Sukkot is a holiday, and every day has its own offerings and mitzvahs. What was it that bothered them so much? And you don't find it in the Torah often. And they use those classic words, Lama Nigara. Why are we deprived? Lama Nigara. So to address all that, let's step back a moment. First of all, addressing the actual thing of Passover itself. Was this the only time in history or in the biblical history at least, that people missed the boat, so to speak, and they came saying that we're deprived? Why is the story about Passover? Why don't you find similar thing regarding the offerings on Sukkot, or on, as I said, Shavuos, or other holidays, or other special events, I should say? So this takes us back to the meaning of Pesach itself. We say Pesach Sheni. So the word Pesach comes from the word in Hebrew to jump over, to leap over, which refers to when the Jews left Egypt, the ones that brought the Paschal Lamb, God said, smear some blood on your mezuzah. So when the angel of death would come, he would pass over those homes. Which is also a strange thing, to name a holiday based on an angel of death passing over. It doesn't sound so appealing. Couldn't find another name that would capture the concept of Passover in a better way. Well, the answer to that lies in the event that happened on Pesach. What happened? as we discussed and we celebrated a month ago, the Jewish people 3,326 years ago left a place called Mitzrayim. It's called Yetzias Mitzrayim. And every year since, we honor it and celebrate and commemorate it, the Seder night in Israel 1 night, outside of Israel 2 nights. And we spend 7-8 days honoring Pesach, honoring that great event of leaving Mitzrayim. More than that, moreover, the truth is, Yetzias Mitzrayim is not just one we do once a year. We celebrate Passover. Virtually every day, there are many, many things we do that are all to remind us of the time we left Egypt. For whether it's putting on tefillin for men, or tzitzis, different blessings we make. Even Shabbos, and so many other things are called Zeichel Yetzias Mitzrayim. They're a reminder of our leaving Egypt. At the end of every morning prayer, we say 6 Sheish Chiras, the 6 reminders, and one of them is leaving Egypt. If you look in the Shema, you mentioned the leaving of Egypt. Wherever you turn, 10 commandments, Anecha Shem Lakecha, I am your God, took you out of Egypt. Wherever you turn, you find in Judaism constant reference, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of references, mitzvahs that are based on it, traditions that we do, prayers that we say. The question is, what is so fundamental about Yetzias Mitzrayim that it should permeate and saturate literally every aspect of Judaism? To just amplify the question, as I believe I discussed before Passover this year, there's a Talmud that says that in every generation a person has to envision themselves as if they left Egypt, as if they left Mitzrayim, every year, every generation. Some add, in Tanya and other places it says, not just B'chol Dar V'Dar in every generation, but B'chol Yom V'Yom, every day. Which just begs the question, again, what's the significance? What does it mean to leave? They left Egypt 3,326 years ago. Why do we have to envision that we're doing it now? We left a God-forsaken place. As a matter of fact, there are many commentaries and many opinions that hold you're not even allowed to go back to Mitzrayim, because there's a verse in the Torah that says you'll never return to this place. So why do we have to envision the leaving of Egypt? All these questions force you to have to look back at the event itself, and here you see the power of the Hebrew language, which is lost often in translation. In Hebrew, Yetzias Mitzrayim means much more than leaving Egypt. Egypt is the physical translation of the geographical country called Mitzrayim. But Mitzrayim means much more than Egypt. Mitzrayim comes from the word Meitzar, which means boundary. It refers to limitations, constraints, constrictions, inhibitions, fears. Basically, Yetzias Mitzrayim was not just a physical event of actually leaving a country called Mitzrayim. It was far more deeper than that. It was a spiritual event that the Jewish people learned to taste freedom for the first time. And freedom doesn't just mean freedom from slavery. Just like love is not just the absence of hate, and peace, shalom, is not just the absence of war. Freedom is not just the absence of slavery. Freedom is a psychological and emotional state where you feel that nothing imposes itself upon you. So yes, slavery takes on, in a very literal form, bondage when you're enslaved to another country, another nation, slave labor and so on. But there's a far deeper slavery. You can be living in prosperous America today, the 21st century, have a good job, feel that you can buy anything you want, and still be the biggest slave. Slave to your own desires, slave to your own fears, a slave to your own inhibitions, a slave to your childhood experiences, whatever it is that keeps you from blossoming, from thriving. So we have to read Torah in a new way. The way we are taught Torah is usually like this. You read the story, it's a story that happened thousands of years ago, and we remember what happened that's part of our history. But the Zohar makes a very big statement. The Zohar, the Holy Zohar, which is a book of Kabbalah, the fundamental work, authored by Rav Shimon Bar Yochai, who we honor his yahrzeit this coming Sunday, Lag BaOmer. The Zohar says that anyone that says the Torah is stories says very sharp words about such a person. The Torah is not a book of stories. It's not a book of history. It's not even a book of inspiration, not a book of laws. It's a spiritual blueprint of existence. Like an architect who has a blueprint by which he creates and builds his structures, God wrote a blueprint, etched a blueprint drew a blueprint before he created the universe, which explains the opening verses of Genesis, where it says, Vayikra Elokim yehi or vayhi or. And God said, let there be light, and there was light. What's this saying? Why doesn't it just say, Vayikra Elokim or, God created light? What does it mean? God said that there be light, and there was light. It's like a redundant. If you look at especially the precision and the what's the word I want to use? Not just the precision, the minimalistic language and vocabulary used in the Torah. Every word counts. It's far easier to say God created light. The answer is because God looked into his blueprint and read. It said there, Vayikra Elokim. He looked in the blueprint and says, let there be light. Based on that, he created light. So the Torah ends up being a blueprint by which God creates the world, and a blueprint by which we sustain the universe. That's the Zohar's expression. But to appreciate that, you have to look not just at the body of Torah, but as the Zohar says, also at the soul of Torah. Everything has a body and a soul. Imagine reading a book, and you know how to read the language. You understand the words, but you're missing between the lines, the spirit. Words are words. Torah speaks in the language of man, but there's a spirit to it all. There's a soul in the Torah, the Shmasa Daraisa. And some of the commentaries, the Shalah, the Rameh Mepano, and other mystics write that the Torah really talks about things above and alludes to things below. Which means, as opposed to many people think that the Torah talks about things below and alludes to the spiritual above, in truth the Torah speaks about the spirit and alludes to things below. Which really means that the language and the ideas of the Torah are all begin on a spiritual plane and then they descend to a physical plane. So yes, there was a physical land called Mitzrayim, Egypt, but before that there was a spiritual state called boundaries, limitations, and constraints. And from there evolved the physical country called Mitzrayim. And the truth is, and that is true across the board, the entire Torah. Every episode, every event, every character, every interaction is really a spiritual interaction that's happening right now in our day and age, in our own inner spirits, in the larger universe on a cosmic level. Except there was a time where it actually happened at one point in history where it manifests in a physical form. The Torah follows a literal, but the literal is just a one-time event. So we have an Abraham within us, and we have an Isaac within us, and we have a Jacob within us. We have a Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, and Leah within us, and we have a Mitzrayim within us. Mitzrayim within us is fill the blanks in, make it relevant by associating with whatever keeps you trapped, whatever deficiency, whatever limitation, whatever inhibition, as I mentioned, any fear, that's your Mitzrayim. And what happened on Passover was Yetzias Mitzrayim was leaving, transcendence in one word. Transcendence captures the ultimate search of every human being, to transcend the monotony, the routine, and the patterns of our lives. Human beings cannot survive an animal bliss alone. We need transcendence. We need to feel that there's something greater. That's why we search in many ways. Transcendence manifests itself. It could be through music, art, travel, hobbies. It can be through spirituality, religion. It can be through sexuality, romance, love. Anything that takes you out of the humdrum of the grind, of the daily routine, is a transcendent experience. So Yetzias Mitzrayim is essentially the concept of transcendence, transcending the boundaries, Mitzrayim, of our lives, leaving. So every journey, sometimes it takes on even shapes that are destructive. When people use, for example, foreign substances, whether it's alcohol or drugs, to get high, they're searching for relief. They'd be searching it perhaps with destructive forces, destructive substances. But they're searching for relief from the monotony of life. But there are ways that you can experience transcendence in a healthy way. So Yetzias Mitzrayim opened up the door, as the Maral of Prague says. It opened the door of freedom, that after that the Jewish people could never be enslaved again. Not just physically, spiritually. Because you could have someone who's in prison, but their spirit is free. You could have someone, as I said earlier, that's sitting and can do whatever they like, and their spirit is in prison. And that what happened on Passover. And that's why it's called Passover, Pesach. It wasn't just about the angel of death jumping over doors, from one door to another. It was the concept of jumping over, of leaping beyond boundaries. That was the meaning of the word. So it originates, yes, from him jumping and saying that the Jewish people will be seen as unique and not just be kill their firstborn with the other firstborn of the Egyptians. But its deeper meaning is the idea of transcendence, to Pesach, to jump, to leap up. And think in life, look at children. Newborn children are constantly leaping and bounding. They're always looking, they're enchanted by everything, they're excited, they're stimulated. As we become adults, we turn into couch potatoes. We start slowing down. Lethargic is the word. Slothful. Where we begin to harden to the point, God forbid, of death. So the idea of transcendence is the idea of that vibrancy and dynamic element that makes a human being human. The spirit. Ner Hashem Nishmas Adam, the Torah says, the book of Proverbs says. A human being, the soul, Ner Hashem, the flame of God is the soul of a human being. What's a flame? Look at a flame. It's always flickering, it's always alive, it's always yearning, it's always pining to reach something higher. It's licking the air. The wick grounds it. Same with our souls. The human soul, by its very nature, is always flickering, is always searching, is always restless. Now, so when people say, I wish I could have some calm, not be so restless, no, you don't wish that. You don't wish maybe anxiety. You don't want to have worries and concerns and anxiety. I remember I mentioned always this cardiologist that I know, comes to the class once in a while, who tells me his life is so stressful, he wishes everything would just stop and just have complete calm. So I tell him, you mean like a straight line? He says, no, not like a straight line. Because we know in a cardiogram, a straight line is death. You want to have, you look at a heartbeat, the heartbeat is like a wave, like a flame. Same thing, we breathe all the time. It's a constant mobility and process of, that's what life by definition is not sterile. Life by definition is mobile, is constantly on the move. The only thing is you want, like in a heartbeat, you want the wave to be balanced. The peaks and the valleys should be coordinated. That's what you want. Too much anxiety would be a high peak. Too much resolution would be too low of a valley. So we need to have the perfect balance of angst, tension, and resolution. That's the secret to life. Too much tension, no good. Too much resolution is no good. And that's the key. So Mitzvah Mitzrayim therefore opened up the door to a restless soul continuously searching, hoping, looking to reach greater heights. And that is why it's so significant. That's why the Torah mentions it again and again and again. It's the beginning of the Ten Commandments, and I mentioned it's connected in the Shema and in other prayers and all the mitzvahs, and we remind ourselves. And of course, Passover, it comes to a climax where we celebrate 8 full days to remember this and never forget. Even more interesting, later we'll read the Torah when it comes to the end of the 42 journeys that the Jewish people took from Mitzrayim to the Promised Land. So it's 42 steps. A number of years ago, I actually wrote up a psychological take on these 42 steps. If anybody wants to get it, just email us at meaningfullife.com, and we'll send it to you. It's online on our website. So, what does the Torah say? Eila Maseh B'nai Yisrael. These are the journeys of the Jewish people, of the children of Israel. B'tseisam, leaving Eretz Mitzrayim. And it enumerates all the 42 till the last one, the east side, the east bank of the river Jordan, which is a long way from Egypt, from Mitzrayim. So the question is asked, why is it called Eila Maseh B'nai Yisrael B'tseisam? Why are you still calling it leaving Egypt? You left Egypt. That was the first leg of the journey. You left Egypt, Ramses. Then you went the next step, then they came to Sinai. Then began a long 40-year journey of 42 steps. Why by the 42nd step are we still saying it's all leaving Egypt? For this exact reason. Because it's not a geographical thing. Leaving Egypt is the purpose of life, which is transcendence from our limitations, from our Mitzrayim, from our Meitzarim v'Gvulim. So all 42 journeys, entering the Promised Land, is all a continuation of transcendence, is essentially the idea. Until we each actually reach when Mashiach will come, the end of history, as we know it. It's still associated, Kemeit Seischem Eretz Mitzrayim, Aren Neflois, it says. Just like when you left Egypt, I will show you wonders. Why again are we associating with Egypt? Egypt is thousands of years ago. Because it's not just that it was the first redemption, it's a redemption that continues to replay itself in our lives every moment. Every time we try and we attempt and we are successful at getting out of the doldrums, getting out of the constraints, in Abish's spheres, we're experiencing Yetzias Mitzrayim. Welcome. Chas and Kal, groom and bride. This is a more intimate, personal class. Yeah. Okay, so this now answers the big question. You came right at the answer. It answers the big question, why these people were so disturbed that they could not bring the Pesach, Korban Pesach. Today is Pesach Sheni, as I said. And the group of people that came and said, why are we deprived? Lama Negara. And think of the words they used. Lama Negara is a very emotional statement. Why are we deprived? You don't find it elsewhere. There are many mitzvahs, there are many offerings, karbanos and so on, that I'm sure people missed for whatever reason. Why here, of all things, they're bothered by the Paschal Lamb? As I said, and if they missed a different mitzvah, they didn't come, and they say the words, why are we deprived? Because the answer is what I just elaborated on, because Yetzias Mitzrayim is not a small matter. It's like you missed the boat. Yetzias Mitzrayim carries the secret to all transcendence. And transcendence is the secret to life. So many thinkers and so many people argue that we human beings are bound and trapped in a material existence and can't really go anywhere. We're bound by our, first of all, physical needs, our emotional needs, our psychological needs. We could be hurt and wounded by others, abuse. We're vulnerable, fragile creatures. And you see it when suddenly one shock, God forbid, everyone should be protected. But things happen in life, and suddenly you realize how fragile you are, no matter how powerful you thought you were. So you can make an argument that we're very small little creatures, and why do we think we really can find freedom in our lives? The answer lies because God, yes, gave us Yetzias Mitzrayim and led us out of Egypt and said it's not just Egypt. Every time you feel trapped, know that you have the power to get out of your traps. So imagine that announcement was made and the people who were there experienced it, and suddenly you come and say, hey, I missed it. I missed that statement. It's like missing the whole secret to life. That's why they said, why are we deprived? It wasn't just a small event, Yetzias Mitzrayim. It wasn't just a small event. So the fact that they could not bring a Paschal Lamb disturbed them to the deepest part of their heart, because it was like they're doomed. They feel doomed. Lama Negara. And the answer is, give them a second Pesach. Which also begs the question, why only here? Why is there no Sukkah Sheni? Why is there no Shavuos Sheni? Why is there no, good, we don't have Chanukah and Purim yet. But why is there no Sheni for others? Since when do you have like a second holiday? Because you missed the first one. Like let's say you miss Shabbos. You don't get a Shabbos Sheni. You have to wait next Shabbos. Because Pesach is not just another holiday. It's the holiday of all holidays that opens up the door of transcendence. The ability for human beings in our constraints to experience Bli Gvul, to taste eternity, to taste immortality. And that is why they cried, why are we deprived? And that's why they were given, and we're given, a Pesach Sheni that says it's never too late. Here's a second opportunity. And as I said before, it's very interesting. This Pesach Sheni, in all other ways, has no similarity to Passover. You're allowed to eat chametz bread. You're allowed to work. There's no Seder. There's nothing similar. Only one thing. It's Pesach Sheni. In the times of the temple, they could bring a Paschal Lamb. Today, we honor it through tasting some matzah and so on. Because the power of it is the power of being able to give them the chance that everyone, even if you missed the first time, has the opportunity to achieve transcendence. That's the key word, Yetzias Mitzrayim. Pesach, Sheni. So it's a second chance to gain that access. That means, as the Vayikra Rebbe says, that nothing is ever lost. You always have a second chance. But this doesn't apply to other areas. For example, it says about a korban that you bring every day, over Uzmane, Batel Karbane. The day passed, you can't bring the next day an offering for 2 days. There are mitzvahs that are connected to time that you can't say, listen, I missed Shabbos last week, I'm going to do Shabbos twice. Or I missed a prayer yesterday, I'm going to daven Shacharis, morning prayer tomorrow, twice. No, it's bound to time. But Passover, because it's the opening of transcendence, which is the key to all of life, that we're not bound by our limitations, that we can free ourselves, that was what was given to them. So how does this apply now to our own lives? As I mentioned before, that it's no surprise to anyone that humans are not perfect. There is no perfect human being. And yet, there's very different ways we deal with our imperfections. And here you have the lesson. The people that missed the first Pesach, the reason was, as it says, they were either b'derech recheka, meaning they're distant from the temple. You can't bring a Paschal lamb outside of Jerusalem and outside of the temple. So let's say they're on a journey. They're traveling slowly. Derech recheka also can mean spiritually that they're spiritually distant. They're unaware. They're distracted by different things. Or tameya. They're impure. In Hebrew, the word tameh is a concept called impurities. The truth is, impurities are really not a good translation. Tameh really is a spiritual, you can say, bacteria. It's a spiritual pollutant. What does it mean? Wherever there's, like we see, even a physical level, where do bacteria gather? Where do parasites and toxins gather? They gather where there's nourishment. They don't go to arid, dry areas. They go where there's moisture. They go where there's life. That's why you see, God forbid, when the body decomposes, why is there such a terrible stench? It's because the bacteria are gathering there to feed off of it. They don't go to places where there's no nourishment. And the more nourishment there is, the more the bacteria gather there. On a very simple level, why do you have to sterilize, for example, a surgery room where there's an operation? When you open up the internal organs, because they have so much power and energy, they're very, very vulnerable to infection. When the body's closed, so the hair, the skin, the outer layers prevent most of the bacteria from entering our bodies, at least the destructive ones. So when you're dealing with, on the spiritual level, the same is true. There's a thing called tahara, and tuma. When something is pure, means that it's spiritually pure. We could say, and then there's something called spiritually impure. Spiritually impure is where there's a lot of holiness. There's always the other side that gathers there. Take an example: sexuality. Sexuality, from the Torah point of view, is the holiest thing on earth. Like entering the Holy of Holies, the power to give birth, the power of intimacy, the power of two people reaching the deepest parts of each other. And yet, we also see sexuality, when it's distorted, can be the most destructive force on earth as well. Look what it can do to people. It can bring people to the most depraved levels and perverse levels, behaving in ways that no one could even imagine, etc. Because wherever there's power, power can go in two directions. It's like fire. More powerful fire can be the most beautiful thing on earth, but could also be the most destructive thing. Things that have no energy, the negative forces don't gather there. So you look in the Torah, wherever you see Tumah, you'll see there's always a lot of energy there. And that's why the Tumah gathers. That's why you need to protect it. For example, on Yom Kippur, the high priest that went into the Holy of Holies had to go with great care. He only went in for a few minutes. All year round, it was off limits. Why? Because it was such a holy place, it could not tolerate any blemish. And even on Yom Kippur, when the high priest would go in, they would tie him with ropes. Because in case he had any sin, he would die there. And since no one could go in, they had to pull him out by the ropes. Now, what is the meaning of that? Think of it this way, to use them on a humorous note. There was a Jigan and Schuchmacher, were two Yiddish linguists and comedians. So their line was that the Jewish theory of relativity goes like this: 3 hairs on your head isn't much, but 3 hairs in the soup, right? That's the theory of relativity. So when you have, let's say, a piece of dust on your finger, big thing. But if you have a piece of dust on your eyeball, it's very irritating. Same dust. Ravav al-beged Talmud Chacham, which is a blemish, a piece of dust or dirt on a garment of a Talmud Chacham, is considered a very grave thing. Because it's all contrast. If you have a very white, pure sheet, one little blot, one little dot is disturbing. If it's like, if it's not such a pure environment, you won't notice. So Holy of Holies was the purest of environments. Think of it, the inner organs of a human being. That's where they're very sensitive to any infection. So a spiritual infection was not tolerated in the Holy of Holies. So the interesting twist is, whenever you see a lot of tumah, a lot of negative energy, know that there's a lot of positive energy there as well, that's just has been taken hostage in a sense. That's what you do. What you see constantly during war and so on. Where does the enemy attack? They attack the heart of your power. They attack the king. They don't want, because they want to go where the power is. Churchill once famously said, that in the time of war, the truth is so precious, you have to surround it with an army of lies. The truth is so precious, you have to surround it with an army of lies. Because that's the decoys and so on. So the bottom line is, we want to see power. As a matter of fact, just to use a simple example in medicine, how do they find an infection? Through antibodies. You look at where the white cells are going to defend. You don't find the infection. You find the white blood cells are all gathering. You know that there must be something there. And the same thing the other way around. Bacteria gather wherever there's a lot of energy. Where there's no energy, there's no sustenance, no life force, they will not go there. So to go back to our theme here, on Pesach, one reason, the possibility that a person may not be able to experience transcendence is because they're derech hachaika. They're on the road, so to speak. Which means they may be on the road, distracted, busy with other things. People who just can't even hear you because they're busy with their minds elsewhere. Derech hachaika can mean physically not on location. Spaced out, not there. And the second thing is tmeya. You can be in an impure place. That doesn't mean you have no power. It means you've been taken hostage. Who do kidnappers kidnap? Not poor people. They kidnap wealthy people because that's where the money is. As who said it? The big bank robber said, "Why do you rob banks?" What was his name? Forgot his name already. Why do you rob banks? He said, because that's where the money is. That's where the klippa gathers. The negative energies gather with this powerful energy. So there's an expression in the Talmud that says, Kol hagodl mechavere, yitzrei godl mimeno. The greater the person, the greater his evil inclination, his temptations. And you'll see it. Great people can also do great damage. The greatest destroyers in history, if you look at them, had unbelievable charisma, power. Had they only harnessed it and directed it in the right way, they could have changed the world for the better. Instead, they destroyed. So a second reason that we may miss so-called the boat of transcendence of Yetzias Mitzrayim and Pesach would be Tameh. But Pesach Sheni comes and says that even if you have a deficiency, even if you have an inadequacy, it's never too late. Which essentially is the message of Pesach itself. Yetzias Mitzrayim, that you can get out of any limitation. So here's the irony. So the Jewish people who are unable to bring the Paschal Lamb and experience Yetzias Mitzrayim going out of their deficiencies and inhibitions and fears and so on, came to God and said, why are we deprived? God said, you're not. Yetzias Mitzrayim is still accessible to you. So even if you were distant before, you were in a place that you couldn't see it or couldn't access it, or you weren't smart enough to know, to appreciate what gifts you had, or you were tomei, in some way impure, spiritually impure, psychologically polluted, it's never too late. Here's a second opportunity. And so there we go, is a lesson. Number one is that there's no such thing as a deficiency. Even if you made a mistake and say, I made a mistake, it's too late for me. No, there's no such thing. There's no mistake that you cannot overcome. Obviously, you can continue making the mistake, but the lesson from lesson number one is that there's no such thing. If you really want, you can overcome it. But that's the condition, you have to want. Which leads me to the key thing here. What elicited? God didn't tell Moses, and Moses didn't tell the people, hey, listen, we know that some of you missed the Paschal Lamb. We didn't bring Korban Pesach, so I want to let you know there's a Pesach Sheni. It didn't happen that way. It happened from the bottom up. They came in pain. Why are we deprived? Had they not come, this mitzvah may never have happened. So here you have also, very rare in the Torah that you find this. All the mitzvahs God gave us. It wasn't that the Jews came and demanded and said, but here's a mitzvah, very similar to another episode with the daughters of Tzlofchad, who also came and said, why can't we inherit our father and so on. But that's a separate story. I don't want to go there right now. Here, they came and their cry was so sincere that it elicited the opportunity. And that's the key. You have to be ready to cry for it. If you're not ready to demand, if you're not ready to cry out, why am I deprived? You're not going to get it. Because then, yes, you made a mistake and you haven't changed. The key to the 12-step program, for example, is the awareness that you've hit rock bottom and you're not in control and you surrender. If you're not ready to do that, then you're still trapped in your old place. Then you're still derech hachaika, you're still distant and still tomei. Here the key was that they had to ask for it. There's a story they tell, the Rebbe Rashab, the fifth Chabad Rebbe, Shalom Dov Ber. So Chassid once came to him, crying for something he needed. I think it was the healing of a child, someone when the family was not well. The Rebbe told him, I can't help you. As much as he begged, nothing. He comes out, you can imagine he's completely distraught, because this was his last hope. And he's like, I can't, beyond himself, that the Rebbe wouldn't help him. He bumps into the Rebbe's older brother. His name was Rab Zalman Rabzah. The Razah was his name. And Razah says, why are you so disturbed? You just came from the Rebbe. He said, which was his younger brother, but he was the Rebbe. So he said, I went, and the Rebbe told me, I can't help you. So the Razah was very disturbed by that. He goes into his brother, the Rebbe, and says to him, Rebbe, you were blessed to be a Rebbe, not to tell people you can't help them. You were blessed to be a Rebbe to help them. The Rebbe Rashab looked at him and said, send him back in. He sent him back in, and this time the Rebbe gave him a blessing, and it worked, and the child was healed. I think it was a ill child. So later the question was asked, what's going on here? Well, the Rebbe didn't understand on his own. A guy's coming and begging for a refuah blessing. Why did he say no? I can't help you. And then when his brother came in, suddenly he realizes, send them back in. What, he made a mistake? God forbid. I mean, what's going on here? So I think it was the Rebbe Rashab told the Razah, the reason is when he came, I can't, it's not my power to help somebody. I could help people help themselves. If someone ready to do what it takes, I could so-called intervene and help God open up the channels. But if someone's not ready, it's like someone is being self-destructive, how can a blessing help? I can give you the blessing, and you'll abuse the blessing too, or you won't use it. He said, I sensed that he did not really cry the way he should cry. Not that the Rebbe was judging him, but I felt that it was not, I could not help him based on what I saw. Once he was so distraught, after he felt that I couldn't bless him, and you came in and told me that, I realized now he's open to it. He's open to God's blessing. And that's when he came in, that's when it worked. Now this was not being cruel, and it was not being judgmental. It was basically, he saw the reality on a subtle level. I mean, I'm sure all of us have this at times. People come to you maybe with an issue, with a problem. And you really see at times that they are the problem. They're their own worst enemy. In this case, I won't say that because, God forbid, I don't think he did not want sincerely to have the healing of his child. But it could be there was something missing. He took for granted maybe they'll just go on the Rebbe, get himself a blessing. Whatever it was. But I want to apply it to all our situations. Is critical. People say, I pray to God for all kinds of things. I ask for blessings, and I'm not getting answered. So first of all, we don't know whether we get answered or not, because sometimes, as the Shalah says, prayer means you open up doors. Sometimes there are more doors to open. So you open 20 doors. There's another 10 doors to open. That's one thing. Number two, maybe you did get the blessing. Imagine you go to someone and say, listen, send me a blessing for parnasa, for livelihood. And then God sends you the blessing, but you have no containers. You have no basket, you have no pockets, or you have holes in your pockets. Someone say, send me a blessing for a shidduch. I need a blessing to find my soulmate. Okay? God sends you your soulmate. But you're so self-destructive, or so self-critical, or so low self-esteem, you undermine your own shidduch. This happens all the time. I mentioned the story, just one of many, where I know a couple today, happily married, thank God. But I knew them 15 years ago. And someone suggested that they started dating for a while, and it looked like a perfect match. But then things fell apart. He started a new job, she started this. They got distracted, and they broke up. 5 years later, they met again, and they got married. Not right away, they began dating. So what happened? Suddenly they realized, and before they didn't. So they tell you right away. They'll say the reason is very simple. I was so busy with starting a new business, I thought that was more important than finding my soulmate. So I didn't pay the right attention. I didn't give it the right attention. I got busy. Then when my business failed, and I realized that's not the most important thing in existence, same thing with her. Something else distracted her. So in other words, the blessing was there. They had met. But the question is, are you doing everything necessary to make the blessing manifest? That's the key. And that's why this is a critical element, that this mitzvah cannot be given from above. God could give us the power of transcendence the first time on Passover. Fine, you have the gift. You're unable to, let's say, receive it then, either because of the distance, as I said, you're away or out to lunch, as they say, or tamei, or some type of spiritual impurity. Now what? You were not there. So now God's going to enforce it on you? He can't force it on you. You have to want it. If you don't want it, it's not going to come your way. So now you need to make an effort, the initiative. And that was the cry. They cried out, why are we deprived? If you read it properly, it's an unbelievable lesson. That cry elicited a new mitzvah. It says, your cry reaches me in the deepest place, and I'm able to give you that second opportunity. So that is a critical component when we're dealing with deficiencies or inadequacies. So most of us intuitively think the way to deal with it is, okay, let me figure out how to get over my deficiency, how to compensate for it, how to do this. We rarely think counterintuitively that what will help most is cry out, tell God, you know something? I feel deficient. I feel I'm deprived. Why am I deprived? Why did you create me with a certain way that I shouldn't be able to achieve this or achieve that? And let's say it's even a perceived deficiency, not a real one. As an honest person, you cry to God and say, I feel there's a deficiency. Maybe I'm wrong. So the actual cry, the ability to be able to, in a healthy way, actually feel the pain of not having something is a critical step in getting it. And it's very counterintuitive to modern social thinking. We think today, we're taught that if you go out and get it, you have to go be a go-getter. No one's going to give you the loaf of bread. No one's going to give you the job. No one's going to give you a break. You have to make your own breaks. You have to create your own destiny. It's almost like this all-powerful approach. And then if you don't, then you keep knocking on the doors and trying. Fine, that's called persistence. But it also has an element of arrogance because you think you're entitled, and it's just a matter of you just being more aggressive than someone else. There's also another way called humility, by recognizing and crying out and saying, I'm lacking something, and I really need help. Reaching for help, saying I'm deprived. Now today most people say you can't say that because you can't expose that you're weak or vulnerable because people will take advantage of you. Well, I don't know about people, but to God you can say it. And that's what the Jews did here. They cried out, why are we deprived? Lama nigara. And that reached God and told Moses, tell them, give them Pesach Sheni. They have another chance. So in a way, this is like what tshuva is all about. The cry from the depths of your heart, min ha-meitzer, like Mitzrayim. From my constraints, I cry out to you. Min ha-meitzer karasika, from my constraints, I cry out to God. Anoni b'merchavka, and God responds in an expansive way. So never underestimate what a call for help can do. There's an analogy given by the Levi Yitzchak by Ditchever for Rosh Hashanah, why we blow shofar. Why shofar? So shofar is the simplest sound instrument, wind instrument. Where, just a ram's horn, doesn't have any, and you just blow through it and it creates this piercing sound. So he gives the analogy of a child, of a king who got lost and wandered away, very distant place from the palace. After everybody searched, they couldn't find him. And of course, he grew up in the wild, adapted, assimilated his ways, and forgot basically. From time to time, he would remember distantly that he came from this great palace. So from time to time, he'd cry about it. Now, of course, the child's cry, a parent will always recognize. So the story goes that the king is traveling. The analogy goes, the king is traveling through the woods. Suddenly hears a child's cry. And he remembers his child. So he goes and looks for the child, and that's what shofar is about. We use the most primal sound, what shofar symbolizes, the primal sound of a child's cry. They tell a number of stories, but I've heard this from a reliable source. During the Holocaust in World War II, so many Jewish parents, in order to save their children, gave their children to the protection of some of the convents and the churches and the Christians in the areas, because they felt that that's where they'll be protected. At least they'll save their lives. Some actually even told them, they said, if we come back after the war, just remember that we're giving you our children just to watch over them, not to not to kidnap them. There's many stories about this, because in many cases what happened was, unfortunately, some of the convents felt here they got to catch Jewish children, and after the war, many parents, of course, didn't come back, but those that did, they said the children died, they disappeared, whatever, all kinds of stuff. There's even a story with the previous John Paul, the Pope, who told Rabbi Lau. Rabbi Lau writes the story in his big book. He writes a story, which is not what I want to tell, but I'll get back to that in a second, that Rabbi Lau asked him, is it true, the story they tell, that there was a particular child in a convent in your town, in Krakow, who was given for protection by Jewish parents, and after the war, the parents never returned. But the parents did tell the convent and said, to take care of these children. So the local priest was advising the convent to let the children become Catholics, convert them, and then that will be it. But they went to the archbishop of the town, and they asked him, what does he say? And he said, what do you think the parents would have wanted? Of course, the parents would have wanted the children to be Jewish. He says, so give the children back to the Jewish community. So Rabbi Lau asked the Pope, who was the Archbishop of Krakow at the time, is this story true? Not only was it true, the Pope told him, this man, Yankel Kravitz, I forgot his last name, Yankel something, he says he lives on 3420 Ocean Parkway in Brooklyn, New York. Not only did the Pope advise it, but he actually remembered where he ended up being, because he followed up. And he said it wasn't the only child. So you have people who are righteous in that sense. But there were convents that hid the children and did not let them, deny that they existed. So I don't know if you've ever heard the story. It's an extremely moving story. It's unbelievable. So there was a Jewish couple who went to look for their children. But now the children had grown up. They couldn't recognize whether they were Jewish or not. They'd been living in the convent for a long time. And they were also younger children. So they did something interesting. The convent denied that they have any Jewish children. So the Jews started saying Shema Yisrael in the convent. And they started hearing cries of children saying Shema Yisrael. In other words, they remembered the cry. They remembered the prayers that were taught to them when they were very young. So it was very obvious. All those children were then obviously redeemed or released. What I'm pointing out is that sometimes you need a cry to reach the deepest parts of God and reach the deepest parts of our own soul. It's not always going ahead and figuring out how to fix everything. Some things may be not so easy to fix. Some people say, you know what, I tried everything, every type of therapy, this didn't work, that didn't work. Well, first of all, that may not be the case, but even if it is, did you cry? Did you cry why you're deprived? And that cry has the power to reach a place that gives you a second chance, that opens up new doors to experience Yetzias Mitzrayim, to experience transcendence. So never underestimate that power. But for that to really take hold, you have to be sincere, honest, humble, and really feel that. As I said, many of us don't want to deal with it. Many of us deny our deficiencies. I remember once going to meet someone who was a very argumentative type. He was arguing with me, and he said, so it was one of the classes I was giving. So I said to him, listen, we have a class here, you want to talk about it? Let's go talk about it afterwards. When no one else is around, we don't have to disturb a whole class because you have questions. Anyway, I recognized he was not an easy person. I knew someone who knew him well, so before I was going to meet him for lunch, I asked the mutual friend, I said, what is the story with this guy? So he said to me, he hides his ignorance with his arrogance. And it couldn't be a more apt description. Not to judge anyone, but sometimes what we do is we start behaving in strange ways because we want to protect and cover up on our weaknesses. I understand when you're in business, you're getting for a job, you want to make an impression, there are times you need to show you're stronger than you really are. Even that also needs limits, being honest, etc., etc. But many of us simply create false personas, false bravado, false toughness, simply to make it, simply because we don't want to be taken advantage of. And some people with the greatest deficiencies create a whole identity that's the exact opposite. Remember, very secure people, very people driven by self-confidence and self-esteem, don't need to be dishonest. They're comfortable with them in their own skin. People not comfortable in their own skin begin to develop false identities. And it's not always intentional. Think of it like this. Think of a child growing up in a home that is constantly being criticized by the parents. Child being constantly criticized, berated, humiliated. You're no good at this, you're no good at that, do this, do this, do this. After a while, the child begins to develop very low self-esteem. Is very demoralized. But what does the child often do? It doesn't show that it has any deficiency or weak. And the child suddenly develops this type of arrogance, or even like strong aggression, simply to cover up. I know someone, more than one person, unfortunately, told me he hasn't cried a tear for 40 years since he's 6 years old, because his father told him only babies cry. Now his father was a very abusive, unhealthy, dysfunctional man, and could not stand the crying, because crying exhibits there must be a problem. So he's put on this new face mask, he said. He put on a mask, always smiling, always happy. The biggest hurt going on inside, he said, I felt like a knife inside of me. I'm smiling. And became this tough guy. Everyone thought, I can deal with anything. I'm the toughest guy on earth. He said, the truth is, I'm the most vulnerable person on earth. I just created a false armor, a false sense of control, a false heavy armor that people think I'm the toughest guy. And this is what we often do. Now, it may be good when you're in the line of fire. Obviously, you have to do whatever it takes to protect yourself. But it's not good when you're trying to start finding a shidduch or a soulmate, and suddenly this fake personality comes up, and it's not even you. And you're trying to meet someone and being honest and sincere in a relationship. So I said it's good maybe in time of war, someone's shooting you, obviously you have to put up armor. You have to put up a shield. But imagine if your shield is always there. Then the people that you really want in your life, that love you, you shouldn't be putting up a shield. And this is often what happens in dating. You see people start testing each other, testing people's trust. It's often as a result because they've been hurt. They've been broken in some way. So you test and test and test and test, because you don't really believe someone will love you. And you create this whole type of false attitudes. So the ability to just cry and say, yes, I have maybe a deficiency. Not to demoralize you. It's honesty. It is a healthy thing. It's self-appraising yourself. Now you may discover you don't even have a deficiency. It may very well be in your head. But at least you're acknowledging, and you're not trying to create some type of false confidence or a false sense of power. Now, of course, there needs to be balance in all of this, because there are times where you can't just sit around and just cry and say, I'm full and deficient. But there are times where we need to do that. And you'd be surprised what kind of power you have, what you find in healing and in therapy often, breaking the silence. There are people who have such resistance to describing a trauma of their childhood. Why? Because they feel so self-loathing. They feel such shame. They feel like garbage. They just can't bring themselves to describe certain things they've experienced, because they blame themselves. For some strange reason, children blame themselves for the crimes of others. You see this, children of divorce, children of abuse. One of the big issues. I know it sounds strange if you're not familiar with the inner workings of it. Why would you blame yourself if your parents are fighting with like cats and dogs? Why would you blame yourself if someone else abused you? If, God forbid, someone was raped? Why do you blame yourself? Because it's very difficult to blame someone that you're supposed to be loving and turn them into a monster. So it's far easier for a child to just absorb and say, something must be wrong with me. And what happens as a result is, you build up a whole type of false, again, personality, all to protect the shame. And that's why it's so difficult to talk about it. So when you have breaking the silence, as some people will say, the silence was worse than the rape. Breaking the silence gives you the dignity to at least cry. This is all captured in this story of Pesach Sheni. It was their cry. Why are we deprived? That brought out this new mitzvah. As I said, the only time, all mitzvahs are given from God. God didn't ask us. Here's one that comes out of human effort. Because there are powers that are revealed. Powers of transcendence that are revealed when you're able to be honest with yourself. Now this is not easy to do, because if you have a lot of shame and self-loathing, and you've already developed a whole personality, a whole armor and masks and sophisticated defense mechanisms that define who you are, not suddenly easy to get out of your new comfort zone. To suddenly say, I'm going to be vulnerable. Vulnerability is very, very dangerous for a person who's been hurt. Because when you're vulnerable, you can be hurt again. But it's the opening to become a real person. Or else you continue to live the lie. You continue to live the lie that either everything, there's fake, that everything is so-called perfect. You ever hear people say, how are things? Excellent. And you find out the person is suffering terribly. Excellent sometimes becomes a catchword for like terrible, but I don't want to say terrible, so I say excellent. And it's about understanding that you have in you a deeper power. Now, how did they have the strength to say Lama Nagar? How did they have that strength? Why didn't they succumb to the trap that many people do of denial and avoiding dealing with it? Because they were healthy enough to sense that there's a deeper power inside of you. And that's why the belief in knowing that your soul, no matter what happened to you in your life, whether terrible abuse, not so terrible abuse, any type of deficiency, any type of being hurt, remember, your soul, ultimately, the deepest part of your soul is never really hurt. When you believe that in the real way, that will give you the power to overcome anything. Not to say, I no problem, I don't have a deficiency, no, nothing ever happened to me. It'll give you the power because you know that whatever happened, there's always a deeper thing that's even more powerful. That's what they recognized. That's why they didn't feel that by saying, why are we deprived, that they would fall apart. They saw it as a healthy part of the process. I don't know if any of you ever saw the film, what's it called? Children of a Lesser God. It was about it was also a Broadway play where you have, I think it was John Hurt, playing the role of a deaf teacher, teacher of the deaf, I should say, of the hearing impaired, as they call it today. And he falls in love with one of the deaf children there, one of the girls. And it's a very interesting, a romance between a person who speaks and hears and a person who doesn't. And they're both smart and they're both sensitive. And they both try to introduce each other to their worlds. So, for example, she takes him to a party where nobody's speaking, they're only doing sign language. And their pride is such they don't want to learn how to read lips, and they don't want to read lips, yes, they don't want to learn how to simulate sounds. And the sign language is like a sign of pride, a badge of courage. And he's in the room like that. And then she has to go with him to places where, they're all partying and there's sounds and all that, and she cannot experience or appreciate it. So they have obviously a lot of tension in their relationship because on one hand they love each other deeply, but their tools are very, very different. And she has that pride that she doesn't see herself as deficient, at least the way she presents it. And she says, who says your world of sound is better than my world of silence? That's the battle. And for him it's like, what do you mean? Most people, the world of sound, you're the one that's so-called. He doesn't say you're ill, but you're the anomaly. But her pride cannot allow herself to accept that. Anyway, it's a very interesting psychological story, and at the end of it, they break apart, of course, but then they can't live without each other. So, movies have to have happy endings. I don't know if in real life it's a happy ending, but in this case there is. But there's a scene there that's very interesting, where she says to him that the reason she couldn't stay with him, and that's when they reconcile at the end, is because she was been so vulnerable her whole life, and people took advantage of it. She didn't want to be hurt again. Okay? A common fear. And then she realized, she said, that our relationship has a power. That I realized that I can be vulnerable, and I will not disappear. I will not be annihilated. And essentially, they find a way, what they call is meeting a place that's beyond silence and beyond sound. But the line is a very powerful line in all types of healing. The ability to embrace your vulnerability, which really is the essence of love, by the way. We live in a world where people want to have love, but they want to have control. But love, by definition, means you're not in control, because there's another person who can hurt you, another person who can love you. But love comes with also the ability of being vulnerable to that person. So people want to have the master. I want to have love, but I don't want to have vulnerability. For some reason, vulnerability has become a dirty word. And truth is, vulnerability is the human condition. We're all vulnerable. Yes, we put up shows. Yeah, there's parts of us are tough. But at the end of the day, we're all little children that once were completely dependent on our parents. And as much as we grow into adults with our sophisticated tools, there's still a part of us that's very vulnerable. The question is whether you embrace it and allow it out, or you don't. So you can lock it up in a deep, dark cellar and put up very layers of armor, so you'll never maybe be hurt, but you'll also never have love. Because if nothing can go out, nothing can get in, nothing can go out either. Remember, the walls work two ways. If you're not going to let anyone in, then nothing will get out either. A person like that ends up being very lonely, and with little bouts here and there, sporadic so-called moments of love. But it's not really sustainable or healthy. Love, whether you like it or not, is a double-edged sword. It has vulnerability built into it. You love someone, and you want their love, you are dependent on it to some extent. If it's healthy, there's a balance. If it's unhealthy, it becomes an obsession and an infatuation and can be very destructive. But a healthy thing is ultimately celebrating vulnerability. Take sexuality, intimacy. Intimacy is the ultimate vulnerability. You're naked with another person. And I don't just mean physically in the sense of no clothing. I mean naked in this emotional sense. A person sees you often for who you really are. What gives you pleasure, what's pain. Now many of us have difficulty with that. So we learn sexual technique. It's almost divorcing sexuality from its intimate side. Turning it into almost like a machine, a pleasure machine or whatever it is. But the truth is, the beauty of it is its vulnerability. It's the ability to be with another person that you totally trust and they totally trust you. Which means there is vulnerability, because trust means that the trust can be abused. There's no guarantees. There's a risk involved. If you allow yourself to trust someone entirely with your life, yes, there's a chance they may abuse it. But there's a chance they may not if it's the right person. So it's built into the nature of the deepest relationships we have is built in that we embrace our vulnerability. And we embrace, therefore, also some of our deficiencies. Now, I'm not talking about a person who exaggerates and has low self-esteem because they simply find themselves as being self-loathing, and they find themselves as being deficient in that way. That's not what I'm discussing now. No, that's a whole other problem. That's a problem who's just simply a person who's low self-esteem. I'm talking about humility. Humility doesn't mean you don't know your strengths. It means you know your strengths, but you also know you have some shortcomings. You may have failed at something. How many of us well, nobody likes failure, but how many of us minimize our failures? Ask accountants. Accountants will tell you one of the biggest challenges they have is clients who don't want to hear how much they failed that year, how much they lost. You're paying your accountant to keep the books, to make sure everything is very accountable and very straight, but you don't want to really hear it. Not everybody, but there are people like that. They don't want to hear. And even when they hear it, they minimize it, they underestimate it, etc., etc. It's the nature of human beings. We talk about our conquests. Not that very comfortable to talk about our failures. But again, I'm not talking about someone who talks only about failure, which is a person who just simply sees themselves as a doormat and just has no self-esteem altogether. The ability to be able to look at a failure and say, yes, I lost in this situation, but now I can grow greater, that is the healthiest way to grow. If you can't accept and you can't embrace a deficiency, you will not be able to really grow out of it, because it will always be there and you've never accepted it. You've never learned to walk around it. If you don't believe you have that handicap, you're going to make believe there's no handicap, and you're never going to really get where you want to get. You may feel good, and you may be in your comfort zone, but you're not going to get where you have to get. It would be like somebody running an obstacle course and denying their obstacles, and just falling into the hole and saying, no, there was no hole there. So it's about really that embracing of understanding it and saying, Laman Nagar, why are we deprived? That's what it comes down to, that type of clarity. The clarity of actually seeing something for what it is. And when you see it for what it is, it makes you able to now overcome it. Now you've seen, so now we can overcome it. They tell the story of the story I was going to say about this deficiency, why we deprived. A person, for example, continues to delude themselves, and they say to themselves, no, there's nothing there, then ultimately that problem can grow and continue to grow. When you acknowledge it, you begin to adjust and you learn how to work around it. You learn how to develop it into an asset. That's what can happen. So deficiency can happen. They tell the story of Yogi Berra became the manager of the Yankees after Billy Martin. If you remember the Yankees, good old George Steinbrenner, the owner of the Yankees. So he had, I think Billy Martin was the manager of the Yankees, like 6 times fired and 6 times rehired. They had this love-hate relationship. Anyway, one of the times the Yankees were losing, the New York Yankees, so George Steinbrenner started mouthing off and finally fired Billy Martin and hired instead the new manager, Yogi Berra. Yogi Berra comes into the office, the new manager's office, and he sees 2 envelopes signed, sealed envelopes, written by the previous manager, Billy Martin. He's about to open it when the envelope says, do not open until you have an emergency. So envelope 1 was emergency number 1. And the second envelope, when emergency number 2 happens, that's when you open envelope number 2. Okay. So he left them alone. He didn't open the envelopes. The Yankees begin winning. Everything is cool. But then they begin losing. So Steinbrenner begins mouthing off at the press and the media. The new manager, blah, blah, he's not doing well. He started putting the pressure. And he already feels the heat that he's about to be fired. So he runs into the office, opens up envelope number 1, emergency envelope number 1. And Billy Martin writes to him, listen, he's going to start blaming you for the losses. Blame it all on me. Okay, so Yogi Berra calls a press conference and says, look, the Yankees are losing because they still have the morale of the old manager, and we just need to clean them out from his influence, and we'll get them back to winning. Great. And he bought some time, and the Yankees started winning again. He blamed it all on Billy Martin. Comes a few more months, now the Yankees are losing again. This time Steinbrenner is even angrier, and things are really tough. So he goes into the office, opens up envelope number 2, and it says in the envelope, prepare 2 envelopes. In other words, prepare to be fired, and prepare these 2 envelopes for your the next guy. So it was written in a book, I think it was called Swimming with the Sharks. A businessman, Robert, not McNair, I forgot his name, McMahon. Anyway, he was writing how to get fired with class. Getting fired is a very demoralizing thing. Nobody likes to get fired. But this story puts a little twist of humor on it. But it also teaches you how you can sometimes a deficiency becomes an asset. He could have very simply said once he's fired, he could have had to go to therapy for the next 10 years of the demoralization and the humiliation and the public disgrace, etc. Or, second envelope, prepare 2 envelopes. That's the way life works. You'll see people who are able to get through difficult things not only have a sense of humor, but it's deeper than that. They have a sense of survival, a sense of transcendence, I should say. So even though these people who came to cry out, why are we deprived? Because we missed the first Pesach, they also had a sense of transcendence. Remember that at the end of the day, they were part of the nation that did leave Egypt. They just were unable to bring the lamb, the offering. So they had enough presence of mind, enough health in them to cry out. Had they just said, you know what? Hey, everyone brought the Korban Pesach, it's fine, let's move on. We're just as good as they. No. They were able to say, why are we deprived? Now again, I balance that because some of us cry all day, why are we deprived? And that's not healthy either. People who just sit and bitch all the time and are always complaining and always saying, how come this one has that and this one has that? I'm not talking about being begrudging and constantly complaining. We're talking about a healthy sense of awareness of your strengths, awareness of your being, but at times recognizing that if something's missing, you could cry out and say, in a vulnerable way, I need this, it's missing, please help me. It's a call for help, but it's a call for help that comes in a healthy way, not the person who's just a complainer. That's why I wanted to distinguish between the two. So just take this story with Pesach Sheni about, number 1, the power of crying out, the power of acknowledging, breaking the silence and acknowledging something's missing in a healthy way opens up new doors. That alone opens up new doors. Now obviously it has to be coupled with effort and doing whatever you can to overcome a deficiency. But that's the key. To live with shame and therefore live in denial and make believe there's no impediment or there's no obstacle is not the solution. It may make you feel better for the short time, but it's not going to get you anywhere. So this comes down to brutal honesty, sitting down with someone. I deal with this so often. People come to me I've been dating and dating and dating. I can't find my soulmate. And, you feel bad. At the same time, you have to go through the usual suspects checklist and very people will say, I did everything. I've tried everything. So why are you coming to me? So often they say, well, maybe there's some type of supernatural thing that's holding up. Maybe there's an ayin hara, an evil eye, a curse on me, and stuff like that. And when I suggest maybe they didn't try everything, some people are adamant, no, I tried everything. But you're not objective. How do you know you tried everything? Maybe some things that you don't want to try because they're too uncomfortable. Do you have someone who's a friend of yours that can tell you about your blind spots? So one guy once asked him, do you have blind spots? He says, yes, I have. But I know what they are. Great. So you imagine if you know what their blind spots, they're not blind spots. Because it's sometimes very difficult to accept that you may be the problem. And I'm not saying it's easy. But what happens if you find out one day? Would you rather find out that you are part of the problem, or you'd rather just blame everybody else? Now, you may feel better blaming everyone else because you're not the problem. But let's say you are part of the problem. And one day, 30, 40 years later, you found out that had you just looked at yourself a little more honestly and allowed someone to tell you that, not to attack you, someone kind, someone that you trust, someone lovingly tell you, something, I think you should try something different. Don't do this, don't do that. That may have changed your whole life. I see this very often. It very saddens you when you see, which sometimes you don't know what the problem is, but sometimes you see clearly that the person is part of the problem. And I don't mean this again in any critical way. I just mean it as an observation. You see a person is doing things that are self-destructive in the dating process, in the whatever it is. And very often you can't tell them anything because if you tell them, they just can't hear it. Or if you tell them, they'll never talk to you again. I have people. I'm generally careful, but sometimes you tell someone something or you just hint, and they're just unable to hear it. They really think that you're their enemy. I once told somebody something very subtly, walking on eggshells, and I said to the person, maybe this is part of the issue. And it was something about him. And he says to me, so you're also now like everybody else, that I'm the problem. That's how he took it. And as much as I was qualifying it and trying to say, no, that's not what I'm saying, he absolutely took it that way because he's so used to being criticized that he's now bends over backwards the other way, and anything that you suggest is already too much for him. So obviously this has to be done with subtlety, but the lessons that you can learn from this chapter in Pesach Sheni, which is today's holiday, are tremendous and contemporary and frankly groundbreaking, I believe. I've not done extensive, comprehensive research on the topic, but from the little I've seen and what I've read about this issue, about how to deal with deficiencies, you don't have some of these insights. And these go back thousands of years. And it's a simple story. And when you just strip it from the technicalities of the Pesach Sheni, the carbon, the law, and you apply it in a more psychological way, as I said, it's amazing, extraordinary insights into the human condition, into how we see ourselves, into crying out when we need to, and on in the lessons I've been sharing here. So, let me say as a concluding note, we're dedicating the class to our Refuah Shlema for Esther Tzivya Bas Pesach. Oh, Pesach Sheni, yeah. So she should have a complete and total healing. And say as a concluding note that we, as I said before, human beings are not perfect, which is part of our something we can embrace. That's not considered a curse. But nevertheless, may God bless us all that we should be able to deal with the things that are not that perfect, to learn how to see them and turn them into assets. And the key thing is to see. If you don't see, you'll bump into them again and again. And you may deny it, and you may create all kinds of distortions, but you keep bumping in. The key is to learn how to use them to your benefit. And you see this across the board. You see it in athletes, in swimmers, and so on, where they have a certain quirk, let's say, in their movements. And they can either fight it, or good coaches teach them how to use a deficiency, even a handicap, to their advantage, by embracing it instead of saying, no, it's not there, or I want to be like someone else. So God should bless us all to learn how to embrace both our strengths and our weaknesses. And that alone will help us overcome and channel the weaknesses into strengths. And remember, the cry of a sincere person reaches the deepest places. Min hametza karasika. from Mitzrayim, people cried out, Lama Negara, why are we deprived? Reached the deepest place, and a new mitzvah entered, a new connection, the ability to have a second chance, the ability to discover transcendence even when you were distant or in an impure state. So everyone should have a very blessed week, a very transcendent week, a week of second chances. Use them well. And we're here every Wednesday, both in live here in the studio, right? And as well as, we call it a studio, as well as online, www.meaningfullife.com. If you'd like to get the Omer reminders, either by an app, we have myomer.org is a free app, or by email, just send us an email at the website, meaningfullife.com. And please see us as a resource, anyway, to help everyone in their spiritual journey. And it's always an honor to share a few words, so thank you very much. Philip will not be giving his class tomorrow night, but we will continue next Wednesday, and everyone should have a very blessed week.